Hello, friends. We are very interested to know which cities you are listening to us from, so quickly like and write in the comments where you are from. Also, share what shocking stories happened in your city or maybe even with you personally. Subscribe because the next story could be about your city or even your personal drama. Now let's dive into a new exciting story. Matthew Reed sat at the kitchen table in his tidy home in suburban Phoenix, Arizona. The clock on the wall, an old one with peeling paint around the edges, a gift from his mother from college, showed 7:45 in the evening. In front of him was a plate of pasta that he had prepared more than an hour ago. The pesto had already begun to dry out around the edges, and the steam rising from the dish had long since dissipated into the cool air of the room. Matt didn't touch his food. He was waiting for Caitlin, his wife, who, as in recent months, was late at work. He leaned back in a chair, wooden, with worn upholstery, bought at the crossroads of their life together, when they had just moved into this house. His fingers mechanically rubbed his temples, trying to relieve the tension that had accumulated during the day. Working as an engineer in a construction company was his element drawings, calculations, strict lines that always met in the right places. But today, even this familiar routine could not distract him from the vague feeling that something in his life had gone wrong. Outside the window, behind the thin curtains that Kate had chosen with such passion 5 years ago, dusk was beginning to fall. The sky over Phoenix was a deep orange, mixed with the gray shadows of the clouds driven by the wind from the west. Matt loved this time of day, the moment when the desert heat receded, giving way to coolness. But today, even this ritual did not bring peace. He glanced at the empty seat opposite. The table was set for two, as always. Kate's plate, clean and untouched, stood waiting for the hostess, who, it seemed, was less and less in a hurry to get home. Matt sighed and reached for a glass of water. His movements were slow, almost mechanical, as if he was trying to stretch out time. He wasn't the type to complain or dwell on his feelings. It wasn't in his nature. Matthew Reed, 38, the son of a carpenter and a school librarian, grew up in a small town an hour outside of Phoenix. His father, John Reed, taught him to hold a hammer before he learned the multiplication tables, and his mother, Elizabeth, instilled in him a love of books and order. Matt inherited from them a calmness and a stubborn belief that everything can be fixed if you try hard enough. He carried this approach into his life and into his marriage to Kate. They met 12 years ago at a party with mutual friends. Matt had just graduated from the University of Arizona in engineering and was getting his first job. Kate, with her sharp tongue and confidence, immediately caught his attention. She was 3 years younger, just starting a career in marketing, but even then it seemed that she knew what she wanted from life. Her dark hair, gathered in a messy ponytail, and green eyes that sparkled when she argued about something, were etched into Matt's memory from the first time they met. He was not a master at flirting, but Kate herself took a step forward, asking his opinion on some nonsense, it seems, about whether it is worth building another shopping center in the city center. Matt answered something incomprehensible, but she laughed, and that solved everything. Since then, their lives have flowed along a predictable course. They married 3 years after they met, in a modest ceremony in a local church attended only by close family and a couple of friends. Matt still remembered how Kate looked that day, a white dress, not too full, but elegant, and a smile that took his breath away. They bought this house in the suburbs, small but cozy, with 2 bedrooms and a backyard where Matt sometimes tinkered with the lawnmower and Kate planted flowers that she then forgot to water. They didn't have children not because they didn't want to, but because somehow it didn't work out. At first, they put it off because of their career, then they just stopped talking about it. Matt took a sip of water and put the glass back, a little stronger than necessary. The sound of glass hitting the countertop echoed in the empty kitchen. He couldn't say exactly when their marriage began to fall apart at the seams. Maybe a year ago when Kate got a promotion at her marketing firm, or later when she started mentioning Dan Wilson in every other conversation. Dan said it was brilliant. Dan wants us to redo the presentation. Dan thinks I can do more. Matt didn't mind. He was proud of her accomplishments. But somewhere in the depths of my soul, these words left a residue, like sand that the desert wind carries into the house, no matter how much you close the windows. He stood up to put his plate in the sink, but froze when he heard the sound of a car approaching. Headlights flashed outside the window, illuminating a faded "for sale" sign on the neighbor's property. The house had been empty for 6 months. Matt walked to the window, pulled back the curtains, and saw Kate parking in their driveway. Her black sedan, bought last year with a bonus from work, looked as perfect as always, not a speck of dust, not a scratch. She stepped out of the car, holding her bag over her shoulder, and paused for a moment, looking at her phone. The light from the screen illuminated her face, and Matt noticed her frown before pocketing the device. The door slammed, and Kate walked into the kitchen. Her dark hair, usually neatly styled, was slightly disheveled, and there were shadows of fatigue under her eyes. She threw her bag on the chair and looked at Matt, forcing out a short smile, one that he had been seeing more and more often lately, a smile that seemed more like a habit than a sincere feeling. "Hi," she said, taking off her light jacket and hanging it over the back of the chair. "Dan bombarded us with a project again. I had to stay late." Matt nodded, habitually swallowing a slight pang of irritation at the mention of Dan. He didn't know this man personally. He only saw him briefly a couple of times when he picked Kate up at the office. Tall, fit, with a confident gait and an expensive suit. A typical corporate boss like they show in the movies. Kate talked about him with delight, how he built the marketing department from scratch, how he is respected in the company, how he knows how to approach people. Matt didn't argue. He's not one to pry into other people's business, but something about the way Kate said his name made him feel out of place. "Have you eaten?" he asked, pointing to the plate of pasta. His voice sounded evenly, without a hint of reproach. "No, I had a snack in the office," Kate answered, walking to the refrigerator. She took out a bottle of water, unscrewed the cap, and took a sip. There was some chaos with deadlines. "Tired as a dog. I'll go take a shower." She left, leaving behind a light scent of perfume, the same one that Matt gave her for her last birthday. He stood at the table, looking at her empty plate, and tried to understand why her words sounded like a memorized script. Maybe he's just tired. It had been a long day at the construction site. The latest project, a residential complex on the outskirts of the city, required more attention than usual. The contractor made a mistake with the delivery of concrete, and Matt had to spend half a day sorting out the drawings so as not to miss the deadline. He was used to days like this, but today the fatigue was more pressing than usual. Matt put his plate in the sink and turned on the water to rinse it. The sound of the water drowned out the sound of Kate's steps somewhere in the depths of the house. He watched the stream wash away the remaining sauce and thought about how long it had been since they had had dinner together. They didn't just sit at the table, but talked for real, like before. Once upon a time, Kate could talk to him for hours about her ideas, about how she wanted to do something big in her career. And he listened, sometimes inserting his own comments, more often simply nodding. He liked that she was like that, purposeful, bright, not like himself. But now their conversations were reduced to short phrases. "How are you?" "Fine." "When will you be home?" "Don't know." Matt wasn't sure which of them was more to blame. Maybe he was too immersed in work, or was she too caught up on her own? He didn't know. But he felt one thing for sure. Something had changed, and this something hung in the air, like desert dust that could not be completely swept away. He turned off the water and dried his hands on a towel hanging on the hook by the sink. The towel was old, with a faded cactus pattern, another item left over from their early years here. Matt walked into the living room, where a stack of his work papers lay on the couch. He was going to check the blueprints before tomorrow, but instead he sat down and stared at the dark TV screen. The reflection of the room in the glass looked dim. A sofa, a coffee table, a couple of photographs on a shelf. One of them, in a simple wooden frame, was made for their wedding. Matt in a black suit, which he wore only once in his life, and Kate, laughing, holding a bouquet of white lilies. He didn't remember what made her laugh so much at that moment, but that laugh was one of the best sounds he had ever heard. Now he heard only silence, interrupted by the distant sound of water from the bathroom. Kate was taking a shower, and Matt knew she would probably go straight to bed after that. No talking, no, how was your day? He could have gone to her, asked what was going on, but something stopped him. Maybe fear of hearing the truth, or just a habit of silence that has taken root over the years. He stood up and went to the living room window, parting the curtains. The street was empty, only the lamp on the corner was blinking, as if it was about to burn out. The wind blew dust across the asphalt, and Matt suddenly remembered how once, before the wedding, he and Kate were caught in a sandstorm. They were driving her old pickup truck, and the visibility dropped to zero. Kate then laughed, calling it an adventure, and Matt held the steering wheel and prayed that they would not crash into a pole. They did it, of course. Together they always managed. But now he wasn't sure if they were even together. Matt let go of the curtain and returned to the couch. He picked up his phone to check his messages, but the screen was blank, no calls, no notifications. Time only, 20:47. He put the phone back and closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the house. The water in the bathroom stopped making noise, and a couple of minutes later Kate's footsteps were heard heading into the bedroom. The door creaked, then slammed, and everything was silent. Matt was left alone in the living room. He didn't know what to do next: go to bed, sort out the drawings, or just sit and wait for something to change by itself. The morning of the next day began with the usual sound of the alarm clock, sharp, insistent, pulling Matt out of sleep like a fish hook out of water. He reached out, felt for the phone on the nightstand, and turned off the signal. 6 in the morning. It was still dark outside the window, only a faint hint of dawn made its way through the gap in the curtains. Matt sat on the edge of the bed, rubbing his eyes, and glanced at the other side of the bed. Empty. The sheet was crumpled. The pillow was slightly rumpled. Kate got up earlier, although she usually liked to sleep until 7. He stood up, pulled on yesterday's t-shirt, and went to the bathroom. The mirror reflected his face, slightly wrinkled, with dark circles under his eyes and stubble, which he was going to shave off, but kept putting off. Matt splashed cold water on his face, trying to get rid of the remnants of sleep, and heard footsteps in the corridor. Kate was already on her feet, a rarity for her at this time. He walked into the kitchen, where she stood at the coffee maker, her back to him. Her dark hair was pulled back into a high ponytail, and she was wearing the same gray sweatshirt she wore at home when she wanted to relax. But something in her posture, tense shoulders, sudden movements of her arms suggested that there was no sign of relaxation here. "Good morning," Matt said, trying to keep his voice soft. He walked to the table and sat down, looking at her. Kate turned around, holding an empty mug. Her green eyes met him for just a second before she looked away. "Morning," she answered briefly, putting the mug under the coffee maker. The machine hummed, filling the kitchen with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. "You got up early." "Alarm clock," Matt shrugged. "Are you already on your feet?" She didn't answer right away, concentrating on the trickle of coffee pouring into the mug. Then she shrugged, as if his question was not important. "I couldn't sleep," she finally said. "I decided to get up early and get ready for the day. We have an important meeting with Dan today." Matt nodded, although the mention of Dan again pricked him somewhere inside. He didn't want to start the morning with this feeling, but it just popped into his head. "What kind of meeting?" he asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Kate took the mug and took a sip, burning herself, but not letting it show. She put the coffee on the table and crossed her arms over her chest. "Another project," she said, looking somewhere past him. "Dan wants us to present a new campaign for a client. He says this might be my chance to show myself." "Chance?" Matt asked, leaning forward a little. "You are already a manager. Isn't that your job?" She looked at him, and something sharp flashed in her gaze: irritation, perhaps, or fatigue. "Matt, you don't understand," she said, her voice becoming a little harsher. "This is not just a job. This is an opportunity to reach a new level. Dan sees potential in me, and I don't want to disappoint him." "I understand," Matt said slowly, although that wasn't entirely true. "It's just, you already do a lot. Aren't you afraid of burning out?" Kate snorted, almost laughing, but it came out dry and joyless. "Burn out?" she asked, shaking her head. This is not about me. I don't sit still like some people. The words hung in the air, heavy as dust after the wind. Matt felt something tighten inside him. He wasn't sure if she meant him specifically, but the tone of her voice said it all. "What do you want to say?" he asked, trying not to lose his temper. His fingers curled around the edge of the table. Kate looked at him, and for a second her face softened, as if she realized she had gone too far. But then she straightened up and shrugged. "Nothing," she said, turning to the sink. "I'm just tired of the routine. And you are always happy with what you have." Matt opened his mouth to respond, but the words stuck. He wanted to say that he was not against change, that he supported her, that he, too, sometimes got tired of the monotony. But instead, he just watched her wash her mug, even though it was still full of coffee. "I don't mind your success, Kate," he finally said, his voice quieter than he expected. "I'm glad you're growing. It's just ... it quotes like you're moving away." She froze, holding the mug under the running water. Then she turned off the tap and turned to him, drying her hands with a towel. "Am I moving away?" she asked again, and irritation flashed in her tone again. "Matt, you are always in your drawings and construction projects. When was the last time we talked about something other than dinner or bills?" He frowned, trying to remember. Yes, their conversations became shorter, but he thought it was because of her work, because she was tired, or did he stop asking himself? "I asked yesterday how your day was," he said, looking into her eyes. "You said, fine, and went to bed." Kate rolled her eyes, throwing the towel on the table. "Oh yes, great conversation," she quipped. "How are you?" "Fine. This is not a conversation, Matt. This is a formality." "What do you want?" he asked, and for the first time that morning a note of irritation broke through his voice. "So that I can ask you for details. You yourself don't say anything other than what Dan said or Dan did." She froze, looking at him. Her lips pressed into a thin line and her eyes narrowed. "That's it," she said quietly, but there was steel in her voice. "Are you jealous of Dan?" Matt recoiled as if she had hit him. He did not expect such a turn. "Jealous?" he asked, shaking his head. "No, Kate. I just noticed that you talk about him more than you talk about me." She laughed shortly, sharply, and the sound cut his nerves. "Because he's giving me something that's not here," she said, pointing her hand to the kitchen, to the house, to him. "Perspective. Possibilities. And here everything stands still." Matt was silent, feeling the words bite into him like splinters. He wanted to object, to say that their life was not just standing still, that he was working, building, trying. But something in her gaze, cold, almost alien, stopped him. "Iyumo, we're building this together," he said finally, and his voice trembled. "You, me, this house." Kate sighed and her shoulders sagged as if she was tired of the argument. "Maybe they were building it," she said, looking away. "But I don't want to spend my whole life messing around with the same thing. I need more, Matt." She took her bag from the chair and headed towards the door, leaving the unfinished coffee on the table. Matt started after her, trying to find words to stop her, but his mind was empty. "See you in the evening," she said over her shoulder without turning around. The door slammed and the kitchen fell silent again. Matt remained sitting, looking at her mug. The coffee cooled, leaving dark streaks on the white ceramics. He felt the same way, growing cold, with a blur of questions to which he had no answers. Matt returned home late after 10 in the evening. The construction site where he had been spending the day was thrown into chaos by a rebar supply error, and he had to stay late to sort out paperwork and reassure the contractor. Fatigue weighed on my shoulders like a heavy backpack, and my head was buzzing with numbers and arguments. He threw the keys on the nightstand by the entrance and turned on the light in the living room. The house greeted him with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioner. Kate was at home, her sedan parked in the driveway, and the bedroom light was on through the crack under the door. Matt took off his shoes, leaving them on the threshold, and went into the kitchen to pour water. The glass in his hand was shaking not from weakness, but from the fact that he was still replaying his morning conversation with Kate. Her words, Everything stands still here, stuck in my head like a splinter that cannot be pulled out. He took a sip and set the glass down when he heard footsteps. Kate walked out of the bedroom, holding the phone in her hands. She was wearing light pajama shorts and a tank top, which she wore when she wanted to have a lazy evening. But her face, illuminated by the phone screen, looked tense, and her fingers quickly typed something until she noticed Matt. "You're late," she said, without looking up from the phone. Her voice was even, almost indifferent. "Yeah, there's trouble at the construction site," Matt answered, leaning against the countertop. "What are you doing?" Kate finally looked up from the screen and looked at him. Her lips twitched in a faint smile, but her eyes remained cold. "I'm corresponding with Dan," she said, as if it was a given. "He sent a couple of ideas for the campaign. He wants me to look before tomorrow." Matt nodded, although something sank inside him. He didn't want to start an argument again, but her words, texting Dan, at 10 in the evening sounded like a challenge. "At this time?" he asked, trying not to let his voice show his irritation. "Can't it wait until morning?" Kate shrugged and put the phone in her shorts pocket. "He's a perfectionist," she said, walking to the sofa and sitting down. "If something comes to his mind, he immediately writes. It's better to answer than to then listen to why I ignored it." Matt followed her into the living room and stopped at the chair across from her. He watched as she settled down on the sofa, pulling her knees to her chest, and tried to understand what bothered him so much. Not the fact of the correspondence itself, he knew that her work required flexibility, and the way she spoke about Dan was with a slight admiration, which he had not heard in her voice for a long time when it came to himself. "And what kind of ideas?" he asked, sitting down in a chair. "What's so urgent?" Kate looked at him, and something akin to impatience flashed in her gaze. "Matt, it's hard to explain," she said, leaning her head back on the couch. "Something about targeting and visual concepts. You're not interested." "Why did you decide that?" he objected, leaning forward. "I want to know what you do for a living, Kate." She sighed, and the sound was louder than any words. Then she sat up straighter and looked into his eyes. "Okay," she said, and a note of challenge appeared in her voice. Dan suggested focusing on the emotional response of the audience. "He says that standard approaches no longer work, and if we want to stand out, we need to take risks. He thinks I can pull it off." Matt nodded, digesting her words. He didn't know much about marketing, but he felt there was more to Dan thinking than just a working relationship. "Sounds like a big project," he said carefully. "Are you sure you can handle it? You already take on a lot." Kate frowned and her fingers curled around the edge of the couch cushion. "Do you think I can't handle it?" she asked, and there was resentment in her voice. "Thanks for your support, Matt." "That's not what I meant," he said quickly, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm just worried. You come late, get up early, now you work at night. And you're always at your construction site," she retorted, turning to the window. "But I'm not telling you that you work too much." Matt fell silent, feeling the conversation slipping into a dead end again. He wanted to say that his work was not the same as her nightly correspondence with her boss, but he changed his mind. Instead, he asked, "Are you happy, Kate?" She froze, looking out the dark window. Then she slowly turned to him, her face unreadable. "Happy?" she asked again, and her voice became quieter. "I don't know, Matt. And you?" The question took him by surprise. He opened his mouth to answer, but couldn't find the words. Is he happy? He loved his job, this house, their life, or what was left of it. But now, looking at Kate, he felt that this was not enough. "I thought we were both." He began, but she interrupted. "Listen, I'm tired," she said, getting up from the sofa. "Let's not now, okay? I have to get up early tomorrow." She went into the bedroom, leaving the phone on the sofa. Matt watched her leave and then turned his gaze to the device. The screen lit up with random movement, and he saw a notification. "Dan, decide quickly, this is our chance." Matt turned away, feeling a chill growing in his chest. He didn't know what it meant, but the words, "our chance," echoed in his head. Matt was driving along the highway leading to the northern part of Phoenix where Linda lived with Ryan. The sun had already risen above the horizon, bathing the desert landscape in golden light, but it was cool in the car. The air conditioner was humming at full blast. After last night's conversation with Kate, he barely slept, replaying her words in his head. I don't know if I'm happy. It was like a blow to the gut, not sharp, but slow, from which the air leaves the lungs gradually. He hadn't planned to go to Linda's early in the morning, but sitting at home, looking at the empty kitchen and the remains of coffee in Kate's mug, was unbearable. She left for work before he woke up, leaving a note on the table. Left early, see you in the evening. No, I love you, or have a nice day, just dry words like an official notice. Matt crumpled the piece of paper and threw it in the trash, and then grabbed the keys and drove to his sister. Linda lived in a small house with white walls and a red-tiled roof, surrounded by a low fence. There were 2 cacti growing in the yard, which she proudly called her children, because she and Ryan did not yet have real children. Matt parked at the curb and got out of the car, feeling the morning heat begin to break through the morning cool. He knocked on the door, and a minute later Linda opened it, holding a towel. "Matt?" she said, raising her eyebrows in surprise. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and there was a stain of flour on her cheek. "What are you doing so early? Everything is fine." "Hi, Lynn," he smiled, trying to hide his fatigue. "Can I come in? I didn't want to call. I thought maybe you were sleeping." She stepped back to let him in and wiped her hands on a towel. "We sleep at night like normal people," she said with a slight mockery. "And you didn't seem to sleep at all. What's happened?" Matt walked into the living room, which smelled of fresh dough and coffee. There was a bowl of mixed dough on the table. Linda was clearly preparing something for her students, maybe cookies for a school holiday. He sat down on the sofa, rubbed his face with his hands, and sighed. "I just don't know where to start," he said, looking at her. "There's something wrong with Kate." Linda placed a towel on the back of the chair and sat cross-legged across from her. Her blue eyes, the same as their mother's, looked at him intently. "Isn't that right?" she asked, leaning a little closer. "In what sense? Did you have a fight?" "It's not like we had a fight," Matt replied, shaking his head. "Although yesterday there was a conversation. Strange. She said she didn't know if she was happy. And he talks about his boss, Dan, all the time, as if he is more important than anything in the world." Linda frowned and her face became more serious. She was always straightforward, the older sister who wasn't afraid to tell the truth, even if it hurt. "Wait," she said, raising her hand. "Did she just say that? What's not happy?" "Well, I asked if she was happy," Matt explained. And she answered, "I don't know, what about you?" and went to bed. And then I saw a message from Dan on her phone. Something about our chance. I don't know what that means, but I don't like it. Linda leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. She drawled. "How long has she been talking about him like that? About this Dan?" "A couple of months," Matt said with a shrug, "since she was promoted. At first I thought it was just work, but now, I don't know. It's like she's different, Lynn, cold. And yesterday she said that I am happy with what I have, but she needs more." Linda nodded, thoughtfully tapping her fingers on the armrest. "Listen, Matt," she began, and her voice became softer. "I've never been a fan of Kate, you know. She always seemed to me, well, too on her own. But if she says so, it's not just fatigue. Maybe she really is missing something." "What?" he asked, and an offense flashed in his voice. "I work, I try. This house, we built it together. What else does she need?" "I don't know," Linda answered honestly. "But just think about it. She's ambitious. She's always been that way. And you love stability. Maybe you just broke up?" Matt fell silent, looking at the carpet under his feet. Linda's words cut, but he couldn't argue. He really loved order, blueprints that fit together, plans that were carried out. And Kate was always reaching out for something more, even when they first started dating. "What should I do?" he asked finally, looking up. "Just watch her move away." Linda stood up, walked over to the table, and poured him coffee from the pot. "First, have a drink," she said, holding out the mug. and then talk to her. Not like yesterday, but calm. Ask what she wants, and be prepared that you won't like the answer. Matt took the coffee and took a sip. The hot liquid burned his throat, but he was grateful for the warmth. What if she says she wants to leave? He asked quietly. Linda looked at him with sympathy, but her voice remained firm. Then you can decide what to do next, she said. But don't sit and guess, Matt. You are my brother, and I don't want you to suffer because of her games. He nodded, feeling her words give him at least a little confidence. Linda was always his anchor, even as a child. When he was lost, she found a way out. Maybe she's right. Maybe it's time to stop being silent. Matt returned home a little earlier than usual, around 6 in the evening. The day at the construction site passed calmly, without rushed jobs, and he decided to leave in order to have time to prepare dinner. After talking with Linda in the morning, he felt a little more confident. Her advice to talk calmly was still ringing in his head. He wanted to try to connect with Kate, even through something as simple as dinner together. In his hands, he held a bag of groceries, chicken, vegetables, a bottle of red wine, which she used to love. He opened the door and inhaled the familiar smell of the house, a mixture of air conditioning and the light aroma of her perfume that always lingered in the hallway. The light in the living room was on, and Matt heard Kate's voice. She was talking on the phone, loudly and with a hint of irritation. He placed the package on the kitchen table and listened. "No, Dan, I said I'll do it tomorrow," she said, pacing around the living room. Her voice was harsh, almost screaming. "You can't just dump everything on me at the last minute." Matt froze, not daring to enter. He didn't want to eavesdrop, but her tone made him wary. Kate rarely raised her voice. Even in their fights, she usually remained cool and collected. He took a step closer to the doorway, remaining in the shadow of the kitchen. "I understand that this is important," she continued, now a little quieter, but still tense. "But I also have a life, you know. Okay, I'll figure it out. Yes, in the evening. Bye." She threw the phone onto the sofa with such force that it bounced and fell to the floor. Matt heard her exhale long, clearly irritated, and decided it was time to show up. "Hi," he said, entering the living room with a package in his hands. "I'm home." Kate turned around, and her face contorted for a second, a mixture of surprise and annoyance. She quickly pulled herself together, but Matt noticed how her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're early," she said, leaning over to pick up the phone. "Did something happen?" "No, it was just a calm day," he answered, putting the bag on the coffee table. "I decided to make dinner. Are you hungry?" She looked at him, then at the bag, and her eyebrows raised slightly. "Dinner?" she asked again, and mockery flashed in her voice. "Are you serious?" Matt felt something tense inside him, but he forced himself to smile. "Yes, I thought we'd sit together," he said, trying to keep his tone light. "We haven't eaten properly for a long time. I had chicken and wine." Kate crossed her arms and looked at him with something like disbelief. "Matt, I don't have time for this," she said, shaking her head. "Dan just called. We need to finish the presentation by tomorrow. I can't just sit and drink wine." "I thought you finished this morning," he said, his voice becoming a little firmer. "You left early to catch everything." She rolled her eyes and walked over to the couch, sitting down with a heavy sigh. "That was the other part," she said, "and now he wants me to redo half the slides. He thinks I haven't done enough work." Matt put the bag on the floor and sat down in the chair opposite. He looked at her, trying to understand where this irritation came from work or from him. "Maybe you can tell him what you will do tomorrow," he suggested. "You're not a robot, Kate." She turned sharply to him, and her gaze was like a blade. "What are you, my boss now?" she asked, and her voice became louder. "I'll figure it out myself, Matt. Don't interfere." He raised his hands in surrender. "I'm not climbing," he said. "I just want you to rest. You look exhausted." Kate stood up, walked over to the table, and grabbed a bottle of wine from the bag. She twirled it in her hands as if thinking, and then put it back with a thud. "Have you rested?" she repeated, and her voice broke into a scream. "At least you. Do you understand what I'm trying to build?" This is not a construction site where everything is according to the drawings. It's chaos, and I'm making sense of it. She grabbed the phone and headed towards the kitchen, but stopped halfway, turned around, and threw the bottle of wine on the floor. The glass shattered with a loud bang, liquid spreading across the tiles. Matt jumped up, stunned. "Kate, what are you?" He began, but she interrupted. "Leave me alone," she shouted, and her face turned red with anger. "I don't want your dinner, your wine, your advice. I need to work." She went into the bedroom, slamming the door so hard that the walls shook. Matt stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the glass fragments and the puddle of wine. His heart was pounding, and the question was swirling in his head. What just happened? It wasn't just fatigue. It was something more, and he didn't know what to do with it. Matt sat in the living room, staring at the dark TV screen. It was about 8 in the evening, and the house seemed too quiet again after the scene with the broken wine bottle yesterday. He cleaned up the shards in the morning, wiped up the puddle, but the smell of red wine still hung in the air as a reminder that their conversations no longer ended in peace. Kate returned from work an hour ago, silently walked into the bedroom and closed the door. Matt didn't bother her after Linda's advice. He decided to give her time, but inside he was seething with questions. He picked up the remote to turn on the TV when he heard footsteps. Kate came out of the bedroom, wearing the same pajamas as the day before yesterday, shorts and a t-shirt, but her face was tense, and she was holding the phone in her hands. She looked at Matt, and something strange flashed in her eyes, not just fatigue, but a mixture of anger and determination. "Are you sitting here again?" she said, and her voice was harsh, almost accusing. "You don't do anything as usual." Matt lowered the remote control and turned to her, trying not to lose his temper. "I just got home from work, Kate," he said calmly. "I wanted to watch the news. Is something wrong?" She crossed her arms and stepped closer, her bare feet slapping against the tiles. "Isn't that right?" she asked, and her voice became louder. "It's not like that, Matt. Do you even understand how hard it is for me? I work all day, and you just sit here as if nothing is happening." He frowned, feeling the tension rising. It wasn't like her even in their worst fights. She didn't start screaming so quickly. "I understand that you are tired," he said, getting up from the sofa. "But I work too, Kate. Let's not quarrel again." She laughed shortly, sharply, and the sound cut his nerves. "Argue?" she said, coming even closer. "This is not a fight, Matt. It's my life that you're dragging down." He froze, not understanding where such anger came from. Her words hit like stones, and he didn't know how to stop them. "What do you want to say?" he asked, and his voice became firmer. "That I am to blame for your problems." Kate stepped towards him, her face flushed and her eyes sparkling. She suddenly grabbed a pillow from the sofa and threw it at him, not hard, but unexpectedly. Matt caught it mid-flight, stunned. "Yes, it's your fault," she shouted, and her voice broke. "You're always so calm, so useless. I can't stand it anymore." He threw the pillow on the floor and raised his hands, trying to calm her down. "Kate, that's enough," he said louder. "What's wrong with you? You scream as if I hit you." She froze, looking at him, her breathing heavy. Then she retreated to the wall, grabbed the phone, and began to quickly type something. Matt watched, not understanding what was happening. "What are you doing?" he asked, taking a step towards her. "I'm calling the police," she said, and her voice became cold as ice. "You're scaring me, Matt." He stopped, feeling the blood drain from his face. "What?" he asked again, not believing his ears. "Kate, are you serious? I didn't even touch you." She pressed the phone to her ear and spoke, her voice trembling but sounding convincing. "Yes, this is Caitlin Reed. I need help. My husband. He threatens me. Please come soon." Matt looked at her, numb. It was like a bad dream, her words, her look, full of false panic. He wanted to grab the phone, but knew that this would only make the situation worse. "Kate, stop it," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "You know that's not true." She put the phone down after ending the call and looked at him with a cold smile. "You'll see," she said quietly, and went into the bedroom, closing the door. 15 minutes later, there was a knock on the door. Matt opened it, and standing in front of him were two officers, a man in his 40s with a tired face, and a young woman with a notepad in her hands. "Good evening, sir," said the man. "We received a call. Your wife claims that you threatened her. This is true." Matt shook his head, feeling the world crumble beneath his feet. "No," he said hoarsely. "This is not true. She screamed at me, threw a pillow, and then called you." The officer nodded, writing something down on a notepad, and looked towards the bedroom. "We have to talk to her," he said. "Call her, please." Matt knocked on the door and Kate came out, her face pale and a faint mark visible on her cheek, as if she had pinched herself. She looked at the officers with trembling lips. "He yelled at me," she said quietly. "I was scared." Matt looked at her, not believing his eyes. The officers looked at each other, and then the man sighed. "We have no reason to detain you, sir," he told Matt. "There are no visible signs of violence. But we advise you both to calm down. If you call again, it will be official." They left, leaving Matt alone in the living room. Kate returned to the bedroom without saying a word. Matt stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the closed bedroom door behind which Kate had disappeared. The silence after the police left was deafening. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner and the distant noise of cars outside the window broke it. His hands were still shaking, and the officer's voice was playing in his head. "If you call again, it will be official business." He couldn't believe it had happened. Kate had called the police, accused him of something he didn't do, and was now acting as if nothing bad had happened. He walked over to the sofa and picked up the pillow that she had thrown at him before the bell rang. Her words, "You're scaring me," sounded in his ears like an echo that he could not drown out. Matt threw the pillow back and rubbed his face with his hands, feeling tiredness and confusion merge into one heavy sensation. He didn't know what to do next, but staying here in this house, where the air was saturated with lies, was unbearable. Matt walked into the guest bedroom, the one he and Kate kept for occasional family visits, and pulled a duffel bag from the closet. He threw a couple of t-shirts, jeans, a toothbrush at her, everything that came to hand. His movements were fast, almost mechanical, as if he was afraid that if he stopped, he would change his mind. When he finished, he grabbed his car keys and walked out of the house without looking back. The door slammed behind him, and the sound seemed final to him. On the way to Linda and Ryan's, Matt turned on the radio, but the music was just annoying, and he turned it off after a minute. Night Phoenix flashed outside the window, the lights of lanterns, rare passers-by, dark silhouettes of cacti along the road. He was driving automatically, but one question was spinning in his head. What happened to them? Just a week ago, he thought that their problems were just fatigue, a temporary crisis. Now he saw that Kate had crossed some line, and he did not know how to return her. He parked at Linda's house around 9 o'clock in the evening. The lights in the windows were on, and Matt felt a faint sense of relief. At least they weren't sleeping. He knocked on the door, bag in hand, and a second later Linda opened it. Her face, at first surprised, immediately changed to concern when she saw his paleness and bag. "Matt," she said, stepping back to let him in. "What's happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Can I spend the night with you?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "I need to get out of there." Linda nodded without asking any further questions and called over her shoulder. "Ryan, come here. Matt has arrived." Ryan emerged from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and there was a sauce stain on his t-shirt. It looked like he was cooking dinner. He looked at Matt, then at the bag, and his eyebrows rose. "Is it that bad?" he asked, throwing the towel on the chair. "What did she do again?" Matt sank onto the couch, feeling his strength drain away. He dropped his bag on the floor and looked at Linda and Ryan standing in front of him. "She called the police," he said quietly. "She said that I threatened her. They came, talked to us, and left, but it was not true. I didn't even yell at her." Linda gasped and sat down next to him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Jesus, Matt," she said, her voice shaking with indignation. "Has she gone crazy? Why does she need this?" "I don't know," he answered, shaking his head. She screamed at me, threw a pillow, and then called them. She said she was scared. But it was the theater, Lynn. I saw her face, she was not afraid. Ryan leaned against the wall with his arms crossed. His face, usually calm, became serious. "This is not normal," he said, and his voice was firm, like that of a detective used to solving such cases. "People don't call the police just like that. She's up to something, Matt. Have you thought about it?" Matt asked, looking at him. "Do you think, Azam, she did it on purpose?" "I don't know," Ryan said with a shrug, "but I saw this at work. False calls are either hysteria or part of a plan, and you say she was calm after." Matt nodded, remembering her cold smile before she went into the bedroom. "Yes," he said. "It's like I've achieved something." Linda squeezed his shoulder tighter. "You did the right thing by leaving," she said. "Stay here as long as necessary. We'll figure it out." Matt was sitting on the couch in Linda and Ryan's living room, clutching the coffee mug that Linda had shoved at him right after he told him about the false call to the police. The coffee was hot, almost burning his fingers through the ceramic, but he didn't drink it, he just held it like an anchor so as not to get lost in the chaos of his thoughts. The light in the room was soft, from an old lamp with a yellow shade that Linda had bought at a flea market last year. The smell of food, I think it was leftover spaghetti sauce that Ryan had cooked for dinner, still hung in the air, mingling with the aroma of coffee and the slight tang of desert dust that always permeated Phoenix homes, no matter how hard you closed the windows. Linda sat next to her legs tucked under her hands nervously fiddling with the edge of an old knitted blanket lying on the back of the sofa. Her blue eyes, usually warm and calm, were now filled with anxiety, and her lips were pressed into a thin line. Ryan stood against the wall opposite, leaning his shoulder against it, his dark hair slightly disheveled and his face serious, like that of a man accustomed to understanding other people's problems. He had just listened to Matt's story about how Kate screamed, threw a pillow, and called the police, accusing him of making threats that weren't there. The silence that followed Matt's words was heavy, like the summer heat before a thunderstorm. "Okay, let's do it again," Ryan said, pushing off the wall and taking a step towards the center of the room. His voice was smooth, but there was a hint of steel in it, the kind that appeared when he switched to detective mode. She screamed, threw a pillow, and then immediately called the police, without a pause. Matt nodded, looking into his mug. The coffee was cooling, leaving dark streaks around the edges, and he suddenly thought that this was like his life with Kate, something warm that was slowly turning into a mess. "Yes," he said, looking up at Ryan. "Everything happened quickly. She started by saying that I was not doing anything, then screamed that I was pulling her down. I tried to calm her down, but she threw the pillow and immediately grabbed the phone. She told them that I was threatening her." Linda gasped, her hand gripping the blanket tighter, almost to her white knuckles. "Jesus, Matt," she said, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "This is madness. She couldn't just do that. This is not normal." "I know," he answered, and his voice was hoarse, as if the words were stuck in his throat. I stood there, looked at her, and she played Lynn. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the police, but her face, it was cold, as if she knew what she was doing. Ryan nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. He walked to the chair opposite the sofa and sat down, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. His gaze was sharp, analytical, and Matt suddenly remembered Ryan talking about his work about interrogations, about how he read people by gestures and pauses. Now this look was directed at him, but not with suspicion, but with a desire to understand. "What happened before that?" Ryan asked. "In recent days, was she acting strange? Any hints that she might have planned this?" Matt leaned back on the couch, closing his eyes for a second. He tried to remember, to build a chain of events, but everything merged into one blur: her coldness, sarcasm, mentions of Dan. He opened his eyes and looked at Ryan. "She was distant," he said slowly. "The last couple of weeks, for sure. She talked all the time about work, about Dan, her boss. Yesterday, I broke a bottle of wine when I suggested we have dinner together. She screamed that I didn't understand how hard it was for her. And today, it was like an explosion. Linda turned to him, her eyebrows raised in alarm. "Did you break the bottle?" she asked again. "Matt, you didn't talk about this morning. What's going on?" She had never been so aggressive. "I don't know, Lynn," he replied, shaking his head. "I thought it was fatigue. She works late, texts Dan even at night. But today, it wasn't just tiredness, it was like a performance." Ryan frowned, his fingers tapping the armrest of his chair. "A performance, you say?" he said thoughtfully. "What did the cops say? Did they believe her?" Matt shrugged, remembering the senior officer's tired face and the cold gaze of the young woman with a notepad. "Not really," he said. "They asked if I threatened her. I said no. She came out of the bedroom, pretended to be scared, but there were no marks on her or anything. They said there was no reason to detain me and left. They advised us to calm down." Ryan nodded, his gaze even sharper. "It's good that they didn't fall for it," he said, "but it's still strange. A false call is no joke. If she wanted to scare you, then why? And if this is part of something bigger?" He trailed off, looking at Matt. "Are you sure she couldn't have set anything up?" Matt froze, feeling a chill run down his spine. Ryan's words, part of something bigger, hung in the air like a shadow he couldn't yet see. "Set it up?" he asked, and his voice trembled. "Do you think she's deliberately planning something?" "I don't know," Ryan said, raising his hands in a take-your-time gesture. "I'm just saying that this behavior doesn't seem like an impulse. People don't call the police for the sake of yelling unless they want to leave a mark. The question is what?" Linda stood up from the sofa. Her movements were sharp, almost angry. "This is not normal, Ryan," she said, looking at her husband. She accused him of something he didn't do. "It's not just weird, it's mean. Matt, you have to do something." "What can I do, Lynn?" he asked, and helplessness flashed in his voice. "I left because I couldn't stay there. She locked herself in the bedroom, and I don't know what she'll do next." Ryan stood up and walked to the window, parting the curtains to look outside. The night behind the glass was dark. Only the faint light of a lantern illuminated the cacti in the yard. "Listen, Matt," he said without turning around. "I can't say what she's up to, but I can say it's not an accident. In my work, I have seen false calls. Usually, it is hysteria or manipulation. If she was calm after, as you say, it smells like a second one. But to understand, we need facts." "Facts?" Matt asked, putting the mug on the table. "What facts? I only have her words and this pillow on the floor." Ryan turned, his face serious, but there was a spark in his eyes, the one that appeared when he got down to business. "First, think about what happened before this," he said. "You said she texted Dan at night. Anything else? Maybe she mentioned something strange? Or did she act like she was waiting for something?" Matt frowned, trying to remember. His memory was like muddy water, everything was blurry, but he strained, fishing out the details. "She talked about Chance," he said slowly. "The day before yesterday, when I saw a message from Dan. Decide quickly, this is our chance." "I don't know what this is about." Linda sat back, her eyes widening. "Our chance?" she asked again. "That sounds suspicious. It's like they're planning something together." "Maybe work," Matt said, but his voice was hesitant. "She was talking about some project. But at night? And then this challenge." Ryan nodded, his fingers drumming on the armrest again. "Work is one thing," he said. "But if she's linking this to you, to the accusations, Matt, I don't want to scare you, but you need to be careful. If she repeats something like that, it could become a problem." Matt looked at him, feeling the cold in his chest grow heavier. "Do you think she'll try again?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," Ryan answered honestly. "But if I were you, I would start collecting evidence. If she's playing a game, you have to be ready. Write down what happens when you are with her. Dates, times, words, all." Linda squeezed Matt's hand. Her palm was warm and slightly damp with excitement. "You will stay here," she said firmly. "No objections. We won't let you back in with her until we understand what's going on. Matt nodded, feeling like her support and Ryan's words gave him at least some support. He didn't know what Kate was up to, but for the first time that evening he felt like he wasn't alone. The coffee in the mug was completely cold, but he still took a sip. The bitter taste was better than the emptiness in his head. The morning at Linda and Ryan's house began with the smell of frying bacon and the faint noise of the TV, where the local channel was showing the weather forecast. Another hot day in Phoenix, with no surprises. Matt woke up on the living room couch where he had been sleeping after his conversation with his sister and brother-in-law yesterday. The blanket Linda had covered him with at night slipped to the floor, and the pillow left a dent in his head. He sat down, rubbing his neck, which was stiff from the uncomfortable position, and looked at his watch. 7:30. He slept for the first time in days, although his sleep was restless, full of snatches of Kate's screams and flashing police sirens. Linda emerged from the kitchen holding a plate of eggs and bacon. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a ponytail, and there were grease stains on her apron. She smiled at Matt, but the smile was forced. Her eyes still showed concern after his story about the false call. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said, placing the plate on the coffee table in front of him. "Eat before it gets cold. You touched almost nothing yesterday." Matt nodded, feeling a slight pang of guilt for her concern. He took a fork, but was in no hurry to eat. He had lost his appetite yesterday when he left home, leaving behind everything that connected him with Kate. "Thank you, Lynn," he said, looking at her. I don't know how I would have coped without you." She sat down next to him, cross-legged, and put her hand on his shoulder. "Stop it," she said softly. "You are my brother. We will always be with you. But you have to eat, Matt. You need strength." Ryan followed out of the kitchen, holding a mug of coffee. He was already dressed in his work uniform, dark trousers, and a shirt with the Phoenix Police Department logo. His face was calm, but his eyes showed the same concentration as when he analyzed Kate's behavior. "Morning," he said, nodding at Matt. "How did you sleep?" "Okay," Matt lied, looking away. "Thank you for letting me in." Ryan sat down in the chair opposite him, placing his mug on the armrest. "You're welcome," he said, "but we need to decide what to do next. You can't just sit there and wait for her to do something again." Matt nodded, remembering what Ryan had said about gathering evidence. He still couldn't believe that Kate could plan something against him, but her cold smile and fake panic in front of the police couldn't leave his mind. "I thought about it," he said slowly. "You talked about records, evidence, but I have nothing. Only her screams and this challenge." Ryan took a sip of his coffee and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "Not really," he said. "You have a house, neighbors, cameras. If she was acting strange, someone might have noticed. Do you have cameras at the entrance?" Matt frowned, trying to remember. "No, we don't," he said. "We wanted to stage it, but we never got around to it. But the neighbors across the street have it, Jim and Ellen's. They installed it a couple of years ago after someone broke their window." Ryan nodded, his gaze sharpening. "That's already something," he said. "If the cameras are looking at the street, they could film her car, her comings and goings, or anyone else. Are you on good terms with them?" "Yes," Matt said. "Jim is a former mechanic who likes to talk about cars. Ellen bakes pies and always invites us to barbecues. They're normal." Linda looked at him, her eyebrows raised. "Then go to them," she said. "Ask to see the recordings. If Kate is hiding something, this could be a clue." Matt nodded, feeling a faint hope rising in his chest. He didn't know what to look for, but Ryan's idea seemed reasonable, at least some step forward, instead of sitting and guessing. "Okay," he said. "I'll go after breakfast." An hour later, Matt was driving back to his house. The sun rose higher, heating up the asphalt, and he lowered the window to let in some air. The road was familiar, he drove it every day to work, but today everything looked different. The houses along the street, the faded signs, the rare passers-by, everything seemed alien, as if he was looking at his life from the outside. He parked at Jim and Ellen's house across the street from his. Their house was a little older, with cracked paint on the walls and a small porch with a couple of plastic chairs. The camera small, white, with a red light hung above the front door, aimed at the street. Matt got out of the car, feeling his heartbeat a little faster, and knocked on the door. Ellen opened it almost immediately. Her gray hair was pulled back into a bun, and she was wearing a floral apron. She smiled when she saw Matt, but the smile quickly turned to surprise. "Matt," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "You haven't come in for a long time. Everything is fine?" "Hi, Ellen," he said, trying to smile. "Yes, okay. Can we talk? I need your help." She nodded and stepped back to let him inside. "Of course, come in," she said. "Jim is in the garage, tinkering with the car. Would you like some coffee?" "No, thanks," Matt said, entering the living room. The place smelled of lemon pie and old wood, a familiar smell that usually calmed him down. But not today. Ellen called for Jim, and a few minutes later he appeared short, stocky, with greasy hands and oil stains on his t-shirt. He wiped his hand on a rag and handed it to Matt. "It's good to see you, Guy," he said, shaking his hand. "What led?" Matt sat down on the couch, feeling awkward under their gaze. "I have problems with Kate," he said, looking at them. "Yesterday she called the police and said that I threatened her. It's not true, but I need to understand what's going on. I was thinking about your camera. She's filming the street, isn't she?" Jim and Ellen looked at each other, their faces becoming more serious. "Did you call the police?" Ellen asked, sitting down next to Jim. "Jesus, Matt, this is serious." "What's happened?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "She screamed at me and then called them. I went to my sister, but I need something. At least something to understand what's going on. Can you see the recordings? Maybe there's something strange there." Jim nodded, standing up. "The camera records everything that moves in front of the house," he said. "Stored on your hard drive for a couple of weeks. Let's go have a look." They walked into a small room where there was an old computer with a monitor covered in dust. Jim turned it on, and within a minute the screen came to life, showing the camera's software interface. He pulled up the last few days' worth of records, scrolling back through them. "This is your house," Jim said, pointing to the corner of the screen. "The camera takes part of your path and the street. Let's see." Matt stood behind him, feeling his palms sweat. At first, the entries were ordinary. His car leaves in the morning, Kate returns in the evening, the postman throws a newspaper. But then Jim stopped the video. "Wait," he said, enlarging the picture. "This is not your car." A black BMW appeared on the screen, parked outside Matt's house. The time was last Friday, 8:43 p.m. Matt left for work that day, and Kate had to be home alone. A tall man in a dark suit got out of the car. He walked to the door, and Kate opened it almost immediately. "This is Dan," Matt said, feeling his voice shake. "Her boss." Jim scrolled further. Dan left 2 hours later at 10:51. On the next recording Saturday, 9:12 p.m., he appeared again. And again on Monday, when Matt was late at a construction site. "He was there 3 times, Jim said, turning to Matt. "Did you know?" "No," Matt said, feeling the cold tighten in his chest. She didn't speak. Ellen put her hand on his shoulder, her face full of sympathy. "Matt, these aren't like work meetings," she said quietly. "It's so late." He nodded, unable to answer. Jim copied the notes onto a flash drive and handed them to him. "Here," he said. "If you need anything else, call me." Matt thanked them and left, clutching the flash drive in his hand. He got into the car, looking at his house across the road, dark, empty, alien. The recordings didn't prove anything concrete, but they confirmed his worst suspicions. Evening fell over Phoenix, turning the sky a deep crimson that slowly faded into darkness. The office of the marketing firm Bright Horizon, where Kate worked, was almost empty. Most of the employees had gone home, leaving behind a silence broken only by the faint hum of the air conditioners and the occasional footsteps of the cleaning staff in the corridors. The light in the office of Dan Wilson, director of marketing, was brighter than usual, shining through the blinds on the glass walls that separated his corner from the general space. Kate stood at Dan's desk, her dark hair slightly disheveled from a long day and her blouse white with thin stripes opened at the top button, exposing her neck and collarbones. She was holding a glass of whiskey, which Dan had poured for her from a bottle that stood on the edge of the table among papers and folders. The smell of alcohol mingled with her perfume, a sharp, sweet scent she had chosen that morning, unaware that the day would end here. Dan sat leaning back in his leather chair, his dark suit slightly rumpled and his tie loosened. His face sharp cheekbones, light stubble, eyes accustomed to command expressed a mixture of satisfaction and predatory excitement. He looked at Kate the way one looks at prey that has already been driven into a corner, but has not yet decided what to do with it. "Are you sure he didn't suspect anything?" Dan asked, twirling his glass in his hands. His voice was low and slightly hoarse, the result of too many cigarettes and late nights. Kate took a sip of whiskey, feeling the warmth spread down her throat, and set the glass down on the table. She walked towards Dan, her movements slow, almost theatrical, and rested her hands on the arms of his chair, leaning so close that her hair brushed his cheek. "Matt," she said, and there was a hint of mockery in her voice. "He's too busy with his drawings to notice anything. Yesterday, I gave him a show with the police, and he just left, like a puppy who got kicked." Dan laughed short, sharply, and his hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer. His fingers gripped the fabric of her dark blue skirt that hugged her hips, and he looked into her eyes, grinning. "You're brilliant, Kate," he said. "The police are a master's move. He's hooked now, even if he doesn't realize it." She straightened up, moving away from his hands, and walked around the office, her heels clicking on the parquet. The office was spacious glass walls, a large desk, shelves with campaign awards that Dan liked to show off to everyone who came in. On one of the shelves there was a photograph of his wife and 2 daughters, but Kate never looked at it. It was none of her business. "He didn't even try to argue," she said, turning to Dan. "I just stood there and watched like an idiot. I thought he was going to start yelling or something, but no, too soft." Dan stood up, his chair creaking, and he walked over to her, placing his glass next to hers. He was a head taller than her, and his shadow fell on her like a curtain cutting off the rest of the world. "That's good," he said, his voice becoming quieter but harsher. "Soft means it will break faster. The main thing is that everything goes according to plan." Kate smiled, her lips curling into a thin, almost poisonous smile. She reached up and ran her fingers down his chest, undoing another button on his shirt. "Everything is going as it should," she said. "He went to his sister, which means we have time. Soon he himself will give us everything we need." Dan caught her hand, squeezed her wrist, and pulled her towards him. His breath was hot, tasting of whiskey and cigarettes, and he leaned down, kissing her neck, just below her ear. Kate closed her eyes, her body tense for a second, but then relaxed, giving in to the moment. "You know how you turn me on," he whispered, his lips sliding to her collarbone. "This plan, everything is perfect." She pushed him away, but not hard, rather playfully, and retreated to the table, leaning on the edge. Her blouse slid off one shoulder, exposing her skin, and she looked at him defiantly. "Then don't get distracted," she said, her voice becoming lower, almost hoarse. "We must be one step ahead. He shouldn't suspect anything until it's too late." Dan walked up to her, his hands resting on her hips, rumpling the fabric of her skirt. He pressed her to the table, and the papers rustled under her. A couple of sheets fell to the floor. Kate wrapped her arms around his neck. Her fingers ran through his hair, and she kissed him hard with a hunger that had been building all day. His hands slid under her blouse, squeezing her waist, and he pushed her back so that she lay on the table, sweeping away glasses and folders. "Fuck, Kate," he breathed, pulling away from her lips. His shirt was unbuttoned all the way, and he pulled it off his shoulders, throwing it on the floor. "You're driving me crazy." She laughed, her laugh harsh, almost evil, and pulled him closer. They didn't care the office was empty and the blinds were closed. When it was over, Kate was lying on the table, her breathing was heavy, and her hair was scattered across the papers. Dan stood nearby, buttoning his trousers, his face red from tension, but his eyes glowing with satisfaction. He extended his hand to help her stand, and she straightened her skirt, brushing the dust off of it. "We have to be careful," she said, her voice becoming calmer and more businesslike. "If he starts digging, it could ruin everything." Dan nodded, picking up his shirt from the floor and putting it on. "He won't start," he said confidently. "You said he's soft. And after yesterday, he was completely in prostration. We'll finish it off." Kate walked to the window, looking at the dark city beyond the glass. Her reflection in the blinds was blurry, but she saw her eyes cold, calculating without an ounce of regret. "He deserved it," she said quietly, almost to herself. "For all these years when he pulled me back. Now it's my turn." Dan came up from behind, hugged her waist, and pressed his lips to her neck. "Our turn," he corrected, his voice full of cynicism. "We'll do this together, Kate." And he won't even understand what hit him. She nodded, her hand laying on top of his, squeezing his fingers. They stood there, looking at the city, which did not know about their betrayal, and their shadows merged into two predators, ready to tear to pieces the one who trusted them the most. As the day wore on, Phoenix was bathed in the golden pink light of the sunset that filtered through the curtains of Matt and Kate's house. Matt was sitting on Linda's couch, looking at his phone, when the screen suddenly lit up a call from Kate. His heart skipped a beat, his fingers hovered over the answer button. He had been avoiding her in recent days, spending the night with his sister after a false police call and CCTV footage of Dan's visits. But her name on the screen still stuck with him, a mixture of hope and fear that he couldn't suppress. He pressed the answer and brought the phone to his ear. "Matt." Kate's voice was soft, almost conciliatory, something he hadn't heard from her in a long time. "We need to talk. Can you come home?" He frowned, feeling his insides tense. Her tone was too sweet, like syrup hiding something bitter. "What to talk about, Kate?" he asked, trying to keep his voice even. "After what you did to the police?" She sighed, and the sound was theatrical, almost rehearsed. "I know I went too far," she said, "but I want to fix it. I have divorce papers. Let's sign them calmly, without quarrels. Just come, okay?" Matt closed his eyes, feeling how her words cut him, but at the same time brought him a strange relief. Divorce. This could be the end of a nightmare or the beginning of something worse. He remembered Ryan's advice: be careful, gather evidence, but her voice sounded sincere, and he nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "Okay," he said, "I'll arrive in an hour." "Great," she replied, and there was a note in her tone that he couldn't make out. "See you." Matt entered the house around 7 in the evening. The door was unlocked, and he stepped inside. The living room looked the same as always: a sofa with shabby upholstery, a coffee table with a couple of magazines, a TV turned off and dusty. But something was wrong. The silence seemed too thick, almost tangible. Kate came out of the kitchen, holding 2 glasses of something bright orange. She was wearing a light blouse and jeans, her hair was loose, and her face was calm, with a slight smile that did not reach her eyes. "Hi," she said, handing him one of the glasses. "I made a cocktail. Orange with rum. Shall we have a drink before we start?" Matt took the glass, but did not drink, looking at her with suspicion. "Where are the documents?" he asked, putting the glass on the table. "Let's sign and get this over with." She shrugged, her smile widening, almost mocking. "Take your time," she said, taking a sip from her glass. "We've been together for so many years, Matt. Let's talk. Then you will sign." He hesitated, but her gaze, soft, almost pleading, made him give in. He raised the glass to his lips and took a sip. The taste was sharp orange, rum, and something else, bitter, that he couldn't identify. He frowned, but Kate had already turned away, setting her glass down on the table. "Sit down," she said, pointing to the sofa. "I'll bring the papers." Matt sat up, feeling his head begin to spin. He blinked, trying to focus, but the room swam before his eyes. Cocktail. Something was wrong. He tried to stand up, but his legs gave way and he collapsed back onto the couch, his hands shaking. "Kate." He squeezed out, but his voice was weak, like a whisper. What are you? She looked at him with the same cold smile he had seen after calling the police. Sleep, Matt, she said quietly. Everything will be quick. His consciousness went out like a light in a switched-off room. Matt lay on the couch, his body as heavy as a bag of sand, his breathing slow and uneven. Kate was standing at the window, looking out onto the street, when Dan's black BMW pulled up to the house. She opened the door, and he walked in tall, wearing a dark shirt, with a grin that spoke of his confidence. Did he pass out? Dan asked, glancing at Matt. Like a baby, Kate replied, closing the door. Her voice was full of contempt. I didn't even understand what happened. Dan walked up to her, his hand resting on her waist. You're so damn good, he said, his voice hoarse with desire. Let's have some fun while he sleeps. Kate laughed. Her laugh was harsh, angry, and she pushed him towards the couch where Matt was lying. They collapsed next to each other, not caring that he was a meter away from them. He was rough, leaving marks. Look how he lies, Dan said. Poor Matt. He won't even see his wife having sex right under his nose. Kate chuckled. He was always a blind lover, she breathed. I thought I loved him too. Idiot. Stronger, she said, her voice full of challenge. Let him think that he did this to me. You're sick, he said, laughing, and I like it. When they finished, Kate was lying on the sofa. Dan stood up, buttoning his pants, and tossed her a blouse. Take it away, he said, nodding at Matt, and call the cops. It's time to finish. She nodded, her face cold and calculating. Dan left, slamming the door, and Kate picked up the phone, dialing 911. Please help, she said, her voice shaking with fake panic. My husband. He beat me. I'm afraid for my life. Come soon. She dropped the phone and locked herself in the bedroom, leaving Matt on the couch. Matt woke up with his head pounding and his mouth dry. He blinked, trying to figure out where he was, and saw the living room, a broken glass on the floor, his empty cocktail on the table. Nausea rose in his throat, but he forced himself to stand, staggering like a drunk. Kate, he shouted, his voice hoarse and weak. What have you done? There was no answer. He walked up to the bedroom and hit the door with his fist. Open it, he yelled. What's happening? Why did I pass out? The door remained closed, but he heard her footsteps inside. His mind was racing the cocktail, her smile, the darkness. She mixed something in, he was sure. Anger and fear mixed in his chest, and he hit the door again. Kate, open the damn door, he shouted. What are you planning? At that moment, the front door burst open with a bang, and two officers burst into the house, the same tired man and young woman who were there last time. Their weapons were holstered, but their arms were tense, ready for action. Hands up. The man barked, walking towards Matt. On the floor, now. Matt turned around, his eyes wide in shock. What? He squeezed out. I didn't do anything. The woman stepped towards the bedroom, knocking on the door. Mrs. Reed, it's the police. Are you okay? Kate opened the door, her face pale and her body covered in marks. She was trembling. Her eyes were full of tears, the perfect victim. He lost his mind when he found out about the divorce. I wanted to peacefully. He attacked me, she said, her voice breaking. I thought he was going to kill me. Matt looked at her, his mouth opened, but the words stuck. It was impossible, he was unconscious. This is a lie, he yelled, taking a step towards her, but the officer grabbed his hand, twisting it behind his back. I didn't touch her. She put something on me. Calm down, sir, the man said as he handcuffed him. You will come with us. Matt screamed, struggling, but his voice was drowned in the noise of footsteps and commands. Kate looked at him from the bedroom, her lips twitching into a faint smile before she turned away. The police dragged him out of the house, put him in the car, and the door slammed. Matt sat in the cramped interrogation room at the Phoenix police station, his hands still shaking from the cold metal of the handcuffs that had been removed just minutes before. The walls were gray, worn, stained with old coffee spills, and the table in front of him was scratched, with the initials of some previous guest carved into it. The single lamp overhead hummed, casting a harsh light on his face pale and covered with sweat. He still felt nauseous from the cocktail Kate had slipped him, and the bruises on her body marks he hadn't left replayed in his head like a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. The door opened, and an officer walked in, the same tired man from last time, with thick eyebrows and a voice laced with boredom. He tossed a plastic bag containing Matt's things, wallet, keys, belt on the table, and nodded toward the phone in the corner of the room. "One call," he said, crossing his arms. "Then we'll talk about what happened." Matt nodded, his throat dry, and he stood up unsteadily, as if his legs were still not moving. He went to the phone, an old one with worn buttons, and dialed Linda's number, the only one he could remember in this chaos. The beeps continued endlessly, and he clenched his fist, praying that she would answer. "Hello?" Linda's voice was sleepy, but alarmed. It was about 10 in the evening, and she had apparently already gone to bed. "Lynn, it's me," Matt said, his voice cracking. "I'm at the station. They took me away." "What?" Her scream was so loud that he pulled the phone away from his ear. "Matt, what happened? Where are you?" "The police," he said, closing his eyes. "Kate, she called the cops again. She said that I beat her. I didn't touch her, Lynn, I swear. She put something on me, and I passed out." Linda gasped, and he heard her calling to Ryan. "Rye, come here, quickly!" Footsteps, a rustling sound, then Ryan's voice, low and firm, answered the phone. "Matt, this is Ryan," he said. "Tell me everything in order. Where are you now?" "The West Washington lot," Matt said, feeling the panic creep in again. "They think I beat her. She has tracks, Ryan, but it's not me. I was unconscious until... Shit, I don't know what she did. Listen, I need help." "We're going," Ryan said, his voice calm but steely. "What do you need right now?" Matt froze, and suddenly it dawned on him. Jacket. When the police burst in, he was in a panic, shouting at Kate, but the phone, his old smartphone with a voice recorder, remained in the pocket of his jacket, hanging at the entrance. He played the recording before entering the house, following Ryan's advice, but in the confusion he forgot about it. "Jacket," he said quickly. "My jacket is at home. There's a phone in my pocket. I turned on the recording when I arrived. Get her, Ryan, before she finds her. This could be proof." "Got it," Ryan said. "We'll stop there on the way. Sit quietly, don't sign anything until I arrive." "Hang in there, Matt." "Thanks," Matt breathed, and the receiver buzzed as the connection was lost. He returned to the table, feeling the officer looking at him with mild curiosity, but without malice. Matt put his head in his hands, praying that the tape was there, something that could get him out of this hell. Linda and Ryan rushed out of the house less than 5 minutes after the call. The night was warm, with a light wind blowing dust along the street, and their car, Ryan's old pickup, rushed towards Matt and Kate's house. Linda sat in the passenger seat, her fingers clenching her seat belt, her face pale with anger and fear. "This bitch," she hissed, looking out the window. "Did she put something on him? And bruises? Ryan, this isn't just a lie, it's a crime." Ryan nodded, his hands firmly on the steering wheel, and his eyes narrowed like a man who is used to seeing the worst in people. "If there is a recording, we will find out," he said. "But I can already see where this is going." "She wants to drown him, Lynn." They arrived at Matt's house 20 minutes later. The lights were on in the windows, but the curtains were drawn, and the street looked empty. No cars, no neighbors. Ryan parked a little further away so as not to attract attention, and they got out, moving quickly and quietly. "I'll come," Ryan said, checking the flashlight on his belt. "You wait here. If she's there, I don't want to scare her away." Linda nodded, her fists clenching, but she stayed by the car, watching Ryan walk to the door. He knocked shortly, sharply, and a second later Kate opened it. Her face was pale, with slight traces of tears, and there were bruises on her neck and arms that she did not even try to hide. "Ryan," she said. Her voice was weak, but with a hint of surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Hi, Kate," he said, his tone neutral, almost friendly. "Matt asked me to pick up his jacket. He's at the station, you know." She frowned, but stepped back to let him pass. "Yes, take it," she said. pointing to the coat rack at the entrance. "I don't care." Ryan stepped inside, noticing the jacket dark blue, with worn sleeves hanging where Matt said it would be. He took it off the hook, feeling the weight of the phone in his pocket, and nodded to Kate. "Thank you," he said, turning to leave. "Take care of yourself." She didn't answer, closing the door behind him with a light slam. Ryan walked back to the car, tossed his jacket to Linda, and got behind the wheel. "The phone is there," he said, starting the engine. "We're going to the station." At the station, Matt was waiting in the interrogation room when the door opened and Linda and Ryan walked in. Linda rushed to him, hugging him so tightly he almost choked, and Ryan put his jacket on the table. "We got her," Ryan said, pulling his phone out of his pocket. "The recording is on, but I didn't listen. Let's check it out." Matt nodded, his fingers trembling as he picked up the phone and pressed play. The sound was muffled, but clear, his voice asking about documents, Kate's steps, her words, "Sleep, Matt." Then silence, rustling, and Dan's voice, "Did he pass out?" And Kate laughs, like a baby. Next, the sounds of their sex, ridicule of him, and finally her call to the police with fake tears. Linda turned pale, her hand squeezing Matt's shoulder, and Ryan frowned, his face hard. "This is proof," he said. "She put something on you, Matt." Matt nodded, feeling his anger replace his fear. "She wants to destroy me," he said quietly. "But why?" At that moment, the officer entered again, holding a folder in his hands. "Matthew Reed," he said, "your wife filed for divorce, demands the house, and accuses you of abuse. Here are the documents." Matt took the papers, his eyes skimming over the lines. Violence, threats, unstable behavior. He understood. This was her plan to set him up, take everything, destroy his life. "That's a lie," he said, looking at Ryan. "She wants to break me." "But now we have a record." Ryan nodded, his hand resting on Matt's shoulder. "We'll use it," he said. "I'll talk to a lawyer and hand over the recording to the police station. They won't be able to ignore it. Hang in there, Matt. We'll stop her." Linda hugged him again, her tears dripping onto his shirt. "You and I," she said. "She will pay for this." Matt nodded, feeling a small spark of hope light up in his chest. Kate wanted to destroy him, but now he had a chance to fight back. The morning at the Phoenix police station was gray and noisy. The sun barely broke through the clouds, casting a dim light on the concrete walls of the building, and voices buzzed inside, telephones ringing, officers' footsteps, snatches of conversations about petty thefts and drunken fights. Matt sat in the visitors' room, small and stuffy, with plastic chairs and a table covered in coffee stains. His hands lay on his knees, his fingers gripped the edges of his jeans, and his eyes were glued to the phone on the table, the same one with the recording that could become his salvation. Linda sat next to her. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and there were shadows under her eyes from a sleepless night. She held his hand. Her palm was warm and slightly damp with excitement. Ryan stood at the window, looking out at the parking lot where the officers' cars were lined up in an uneven row. He was in his uniform dark trousers, a shirt with the department emblem, but the holster was left at home so as not to attract too much attention. In his hands he held a folder with evidence, a flash drive with recordings of neighbors' cameras, Matt's phone with a voice recorder, and a printout from Tony about Dan's purchase of sleeping pills from an illegal dealer. It was all they had, but Ryan knew it was enough to start the machine of justice. Matt looked up at him, his voice hoarse with fatigue and tension. "Are you sure they will take this seriously?" he asked. "After she filed for divorce and accused me, they can just brush it off." Ryan turned, his face serious, but a spark of confidence flashing in his eyes. "They won't brush it off," he said, tapping the folder on his palm. "We have a recording of her admitting that she put something on you and the sounds of Dan in the house. Plus cameras and sleeping pills. It's not just your words against hers, Matt. This is evidence." Linda squeezed his hand tighter, her voice shaking with anger. "They should put her away," she said. "After everything she did, the lies, the police, the bruises she gave herself. This is not just a divorce, this is a crime." Matt nodded, feeling her words resonate in his chest. He could still see Kate before his eyes, her fake tears, the bruises on her neck and arms, her voice trembling in the 911 receiver. It was like a knife blow, but now he had hope, thin but real. The door opened and an officer walked in, tall, with short gray hair and a badge that said Detective Garcia. His face was tired, but his eyes were sharp, like those of a man accustomed to digging in the dirt. He nodded to Ryan, holding out his hand. "Thompson," he said, "you said you had something urgent. What is this?" Ryan shook his hand and placed the folder on the table. "Garcia, this is about my family," he said, pointing at Matt. "My brother-in-law, Matthew Reed. His wife, Caitlin Reed, set him up. False accusations of violence, drugged him with sleeping pills, filed for divorce demanding a home. We have evidence." Garcia raised his eyebrows as he sat down opposite him and opened the folder. He pulled out the flash drive, phone, and printed out, his fingers running over the papers. "Serious charges," he said, looking at Matt. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Matt took a deep breath, feeling Linda squeeze his hand even tighter. He began to speak slowly, breaking down, but trying to control himself. He talked about Kate's call, the cocktail, the blackout, her bruises, the police, and the arrest. His voice shook when he mentioned the recording, but he finished, looking Garcia in the eyes. "I didn't touch her," he said. "She did it herself." Garcia nodded, his face unreadable, and he took Matt's phone, connecting it to the portable speaker he had pulled out of his desk drawer. He pressed play, and the room filled with sounds: Kate's voice, "Sleep, Matt," Dan's laugh, as he passed out, their rough footsteps, her calling the police with fake tears. Linda covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes filled with tears, and Matt clenched his fists, feeling the anger boiling inside. Garcia turned off the recording, his gaze hardening. "This is serious," he said, looking at Ryan. "What about cameras and sleeping pills?" Ryan pointed to the flash drive and printout. "The neighbors' cameras show Dan Wilson, her boss, outside their house 3 times in 1 week," he said. "The night Matt wasn't there. And this is information from Tony from the Controlled Substances Department. Dan bought this from the dealer 2 months ago. Strong sleeping pills without a prescription. He was a witness in the case. He explained that this was for his sister who has cancer." Garcia nodded, putting the papers back into the folder. "Okay," he said. "That's enough to start an investigation. I'll turn this over to the Major Crimes Department. We'll check on her, Wilson, sleeping pills. But Reed," he looked at Matt, "you'll have to stay here until we figure this out. You are under arrest based on her statement." Matt nodded, even as fear tightened his throat. "How many?" he asked quietly. "A day, maybe 2, Garcia said. "If the record is confirmed, you will be released. We'll bring her in for questioning." Linda jumped up, her voice breaking into a scream. "2 days?" she said. "He is a victim, not a criminal. She set him up." Ryan put a hand on her shoulder, calming her. "Lynn, it's a procedure," he said. "But with this evidence, they won't be able to hold him for long." "Garcia, can you speed it up?" Garcia shrugged but nodded. "I'll do what I can," he said. "Thompson, you know how it works. Give us time." He stood up, took the folder, and left, leaving the 3 of them. Linda hugged Matt, her tears dripping onto his shirt. "We'll get you out," she said, her voice shaking. "She won't get away with this." Matt nodded, feeling her warmth give him strength. "Thank you, Lynn," he said. "And you, Ryan, if it weren't for you." Ryan patted him on the shoulder, his face hard, but his eyes full of determination. "We are family," he said. "I'll make sure this gets through to the end." "They'll take it, Matt, and him too." While Matt waited in the cell small, with a hard bunk and a damp smell, Garcia turned the case over to the Major Crimes Unit. By noon, the team was already working. The camera footage was sent for analysis, Matt's phone was sent for audio analysis, and the data on Dan's sleeping pills was sent for verification through the dealer database. Ryan returned to the station, using his contacts to speed up the process, and met Tony in the hallway. "What else is there on Wilson?" he asked, holding the coffee in his hands. "Tony, A thin guy with a tattoo on his neck shrugged. The dealer who sold him is under surveillance, he said. If Wilson bought more, we'll find out. But this sounds like complicity, Ryan. If your daughter-in-law mixed it up with your son-in-law and he supplied. Ryan nodded, his face darkening. They're both in it, he said. The recording confirms it. Keep me posted. By evening, the investigation officially began. Detectives brought Kate in for questioning, sent a patrol to her home, and requested a search warrant for Dan's office at Bright Horizon. Matt sat in the cell, looking at the cracks in the ceiling, and I felt like time was stretching endlessly. But a certainty grew inside him. Kate and Dan could no longer hide behind lies. Linda waited in the car at the station, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her bag. She looked at the building where her brother was being held and whispered to herself, "Hang in there, Matt. We're almost done." The Phoenix District Court courtroom was permeated with the smell of old wood and varnish, mixed with the faint aroma of coffee from plastic cups held by spectators in the back rows. Morning light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor where the footsteps of lawyers and bailiffs echoed in the silence. Matt sat on the plaintiff's bench, his hands on his knees, clutching the hem of the jacket Linda had forced him to wear to look the part. Linda sat next to him, her blonde hair neatly styled and her eyes full of anxiety and determination. Ryan sat on the other side, wearing civilian clothes, a dark shirt and jeans, but his posture was tense, like that of a man ready to jump up at any moment. Opposite, behind the dock, sat Kate and Dan. Kate looked paler than usual. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, and the handcuffs had left red marks on her wrists. She avoided Matt's gaze, looking at the floor, but her lips were pressed into a thin line, betraying the remnants of stubbornness. Dan, next to her, maintained a cool confidence. His suit was slightly wrinkled, but his posture remained straight, and his eyes darted around the hall, as if he was still looking for a way out. The judge, a woman in her 50s with short gray hair and a stern face, sat behind a dais, her black robe contrasting with the wood of the table. Her name, Elizabeth Crawford, was engraved on the plaque, and her voice was as hard as steel when she spoke. Case number 25319, State of Arizona v. Caitlin Reed and Daniel Wilson, she said, looking over her glasses at the room. Charges: assault, perjury, conspiracy to libel and cause damage. Defendants, stand up. Kate and Dan stood up, their lawyers, a man in an expensive suit for Dan and a woman with a tired face for Kate, standing next to them. The prosecutor, a young guy named James Carter, with sharp features and a stack of papers in his hands, stepped forward. "Your Honor," he began, "the state will prove that Caitlin Reed and Daniel Wilson conspired to frame Matthew Reed, Mrs. Reed's husband, by using sleeping pills to induce perceived aggression and false accusations of violence in order to secure a favorable divorce and financial gain for her. We will present audio recordings, video evidence, and testimony." Kate's lawyer, Miss Harris, raised her hand. "Objection, Your Honor," she said. "Accusations are based on circumstantial evidence and assumptions. My client acted under duress and did not intend to cause harm." Judge Crawford looked at her over her glasses. "Objection overruled," she said. "We will listen to the evidence." Prosecutor, continue. Carter nodded and began calling witnesses. Matt was the first. He stood up, his legs shaking, and walked to the witness stand, placing his hand on the Bible that the bailiff held out. His voice was quiet but firm as he swore to tell the truth. "Mr. Reed," Carter said, coming closer, "tell the court what happened on the evening of March 15th. Matt took a deep breath and his gaze flickered to Kate, but she didn't look up. "She called me," he began. "She said she wanted to talk about divorce. When I arrived home, she gave me a cocktail orange with rum. I drank, and after a couple of minutes, everything began to float. I passed out. I woke up to her screaming at me, and then the police came in. She had marks, but I didn't touch her. I was unconscious." Carter nodded, holding Matt's phone. "You have a recording of this evening, right?" he asked. "Yes," Matt said. "I turned on the recorder before entering. This was the advice of my brother-in-law, Ryan. I was afraid that she would set me up again. Carter connected the phone to the speakers, and the room was filled with sounds. Linda squeezed Ryan's hand, her nails digging into his palm, and Matt looked at Kate, feeling anger and pain fighting inside. "Is this your wife and her boss, Daniel Wilson?" Carter asked. "Yes," Matt said. "It's them." Attorney Kate stood up. "Mr. Reed," she said, approaching the podium, "are you sure that you couldn't attack her while intoxicated? You drank a cocktail." Matt clenched his fists and his voice grew louder. "I wasn't drunk," he said. "She mixed something in with me. I passed out a minute after taking a sip. It's on the record." The judge nodded, and the lawyer stepped back, her face darkening. Carter called the next witness, an audio expert who confirmed the authenticity of the recording, and a toxicologist who found traces of the substance in Matt's body. "This is a strong sleeping pill," said the toxicologist, a man with a bald head and glasses. "A certain amount in a cocktail could knock out a grown man for an hour or more." Carter then presented the neighbor's camera footage of Dan's 3 visits to Kate, his BMW in the driveway, and finally, a printout from the Controlled Substances Department confirming that Dan purchased the substance from a dealer. "Your Honor," Carter said, "we allege that Mrs. Reed drugged Mr. Reed to create the appearance of aggression, and Mr. Wilson financed the plan by supplying the drug and supporting her in false accusations. Their goal is to discredit Mr. Reed for divorce and financial gain." The hall began to buzz, everyone began to whisper, and Kate looked up, her face distorted with anger. Dan clenched his jaw, but remained silent. The judge struck her gavel, calling for silence. "Defendants, your testimony," she said. Kate stood up, her voice trembling, but there was anger in it. "It's all him," she said, pointing at Dan. "He forced me. Said it was the only way to get rid of Matt. I didn't want to harm anyone." Dan turned to her, his eyes sparkling. "Lie," he barked. "It was her idea. She wanted a house, money, everything. I was only helping." The judge slammed her gavel again, her voice sharper. "That's enough," she said. "We have a recording of you both laughing at the victim. Your testimony doesn't match the evidence." Lawyers tried to object, but the evidence was too strong. The judge called a break and Matt returned to the bench, feeling Linda hug him. "They're falling apart," she whispered, her voice shaking with relief. "We got them." Ryan nodded, his hand resting on Matt's shoulder. "This is not the end yet," he said, but the truth came out. A week after the trial, Judge Crawford handed down the verdict. The hall was full, the air trembled with tension. "Caitlin Reed," she said, "for assault and libel 6 years. Freedom. Daniel Wilson, 3 years for complicity." Kate turned pale, her career as a manager collapsed, and Dan clenched his fists, his reputation as a director crumbling to dust. Matt looked at them with Linda and Ryan, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. Their lives were destroyed, and he was just starting over. Summer was in full swing in Phoenix, and the air shivered with the heat rising from the asphalt of the new neighborhood Matt had moved into. His house, small, 1-story, with white walls and a small courtyard, stood on a quiet street, surrounded by low fences and rare cacti. This was not the place where he lived with Kate, with its painful memories and the smell of her betrayal, but a new start, a clean slate that he had been waiting for so long. The sale of the old house went quickly after the trial. He did not want to return to where every corner was reminded of her lies. He invested the money from the sale in this modest corner, leaving a little for a rainy day, and now stood at the barbecue in the yard, watching the smoke from the ribs rise into the clear sky. Linda and Ryan arrived at his place on Saturday with a bag of potatoes, a couple of beers, and folding chairs that Ryan had pulled out of the back of his pickup truck. Linda, in a light dress and with her hair in a ponytail, bustled around the table, chopping onions for a salad, and Ryan tinkered with the grill, tossing coals and teasing Matt for his inability to grill meat. The yard was filled with the smell of grilled meat, hot sauce, and laughter sounds that Matt had missed so much in recent months. He stood at the grill, holding tongs in his hands, and watched the ribs sizzling on the grill, becoming golden brown. His face was calm, but there was still a slight chill in his chest, a remnant of everything he had been through. The trial, Kate and Dan's sentence, their shattered lives that was behind them, but the shadow of the past did not completely disappear. He sold the house 2 weeks ago, signing the papers with the agent in an office that smelled of coffee and paper, and every day since then he has learned to breathe more freely. Linda walked up to him, holding a bowl of salad in her hands, and placed it on the table that they pulled out into the yard. Her blue eyes sparkled from the sun, and her smile was warm, almost maternal. "Well, chef," she said, nodding at the ribs, "won't you burn them this time? I remember how you once started a fire in our kitchen." Matt smiled, feeling the corners of his lips pull up effortlessly for the first time that day. "It was a one-time thing, Lynn," he said, turning the rib over. "And I was a teenager. Give me a chance." Ryan laughed, opening a bottle of beer and handing it to Matt. "You have a chance," he said, his voice low and calm. "New home, new life. You did it, Matt. After all this crap, you're still here." Matt took the beer, took a sip, and nodded, feeling the cold bitterness wash away any remaining tension. They sat down at the table, placing plates of ribs, potatoes, and salad, and fell silent for a minute, enjoying the food and the silence. The wind rustled the leaves on a nearby tree, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked simple sounds that now meant more to Matt than he could explain. Linda took a bite of the rib, wiped her hands with a napkin, and looked at him, her gaze softening. "You know, Matt," she said, "you still have everything ahead of you. A new home, a job, maybe even someone new will appear. You're too good to be stuck in the past." He nodded, looking at her, and felt her words touch something inside. But then she grinned, her tone light, almost mocking. "Although, to be honest," she added, "I still don't understand how you were so blind. Naive, like a child. She's been leading you by the nose for years." Matt froze, the tongs in his hand shook, but he didn't get angry. Instead, he looked at her, his eyes thoughtful, and said quietly, "This is not naivety, Lynn. This is love and trust. I'm just unlucky. I loved the wrong woman." Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.